the Pet Health and Happiness podcast from Bella+Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behaviour and health with expert interviews, mythbusters and more to help your pet lead a healthier, happier life.
Oh, hi everybody and welcome to this week's episode. My name is Rowan Sanderson and I'm the CNO, Chief Nutritional Officer here at Bella+Duke, and I'm with our great friend Dr Brendan Clarke, President of the RFVS, and he is here with us this week to talk about the 5 freedoms or 5 welfares of animals. Dr Brendan, welcome.
Thanks, Rowan. It's great to be here again.
Oh, it's so good to have you back. We're getting great feedback. People are loving seeing more of Dr. Clarke. And you touched on something the other week in a different conversation we were having, which absolutely fascinated me. And already we've had some chatter and people asking more about this. And you talked about something called the 5 freedoms or 5 welfares. Just in a, I guess, a soundbite, what exactly are these?
Okay, look, the 5 freedoms were all around. Look, they've been in place for years and years and years, and decades. And it's all about trying to make sure that as carers for animals, whether we are farmers, whether we are pet owners, whether we are zookeepers, that when we are looking after these sentient beings, which in the UK, it has been recognized that we are looking after sentient beings when we're doing this. And some people have issue with calling it ownership, but it is that we're looking after them. They're companions of ours, that we look after some vitally important things for the welfare of their existence. And this is the reason I've wanted to talk about this so much, is because in 2015 in the UK, the Animal Welfare Act actually brought in that no longer as an owner can you be ignorant of the welfare of those that you care for. Okay, you can't claim that as a way of just dispelling, well, I'm not a caring professional, therefore how would I know these things? So you should, if you can't learn it from today, which I hope you can, then you should be out there having a read up on the 5 freedoms and what you need to do to enhance the environment, the life circumstance, the quality of life for the species you are looking after.
Okay, well, to help you with that,
dogs today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. I'm glad we're diving into this. Now, Dr. Brendan, what we'll do to help anybody interested in pursuing this further is we'll put a link in the show notes. So, link in the show notes to 5 freedoms. Okay, so Dr. Brendan, and I guess before we go any further, the beautiful thing around all of this is that it's ultimately about creating happiness for that animal.
Yeah, I think that that's got to be, we want to be, in these days of mindfulness and everything else, we want to create that. I think we'll deal with those in a certain order, of how we get to that point. I think if we can touch on the 5, and then I will just start with the one that's probably closest to my heart as a vet, and then the ones which actually make sense to me the older I've got, so we can go through those. So I think if we can just go through the 5, so we've got health, we've got companionship, we've got behaviour, which sort of overlaps a little bit, but is in there. We've got diet, and we've got the environment.
Okay. So health, companionship, behaviour, diet, and environment.
Yeah.
Cool.
So health. I think, it makes sense to me to talk about health as a vet. We want to make sure that animals are protected from pain, injury, and disease. And so it's important that if you feel that they're in anything from a lameness that's persisting through to an issue with upset stomachs, or they're at threat of injury because they're just left out to wander the streets. All of those things should be addressed. Certainly, if they're in pain or they've got disease, then see your vet. First and foremost, you've got vets out there. Don't just play around. If you are unsure of what's going on in front of you, this is the time and opportunity for you to make that call and speak to your vet.
Okay. And I'm guessing that health is, as ever, prevention is better than cure.
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, some of these do overlap. And so, there's going to be other things which will lead into better health, and we all know the best preventative health is going to be diet and exercise. That's one of the biggest areas that we can do to improve our own health. The writings on the wall, it's been said to us as a population long and often enough, about how we should be eating wholesome, fresh foods, over, pre-prepared, packaged meals. That's one of the biggest things that we can do to improve our own diets. How we deal with the amount of exercise we do, from, should we be doing that 20 minutes a day at least, and how we do that exercise. So those are two big things that can impact on your health. They actually can impact on all living health. And we just need to think about how we get that into their lifestyles.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, I'm going to leave it in your hands because you're the professional.
So look, the next thing is companionship. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, company, for some people, they will say, they like to be alone. Well, look, if animals truly were meant to be alone and alone all of the time, they would have become extinct, because believe it or not, it takes two to tango, and they need to have some companionship in order to actually reproduce. So actually, I think it's a myth, and I think there's certain species that we do definitively need to actually have empathy for the amount of companionship. So there's obviously herd animals. There's going to be, sheep, goats, etc. out there that need companionship on a day-to-day basis, herd-wise. But actually, we've also got pack animals, and dogs are one of those animals that actually having that ability to be around other individuals within a pack is so important. And in this circumstance, actually, you can take part in being part of that pack. So that means not isolating them for hours and hours at home alone. They need to actually have interaction with you. And I think companionship, if there's another dog, that helps in some circumstances, but where that's not possible, making sure that they have an enlightened relationship with you as the owner, with other people within the family, and they're not just isolated to just be an ornament in the corner.
That's such a good point. Just as an aside, I have a friend who rescues donkeys. And basically, she's always said that you need at least 2 donkeys because otherwise they get lonely. And whenever she goes out without her dogs, she puts her dogs with the donkeys and they all hang out together as one big happy pack.
Well, great. I mean, yeah, it is amazing actually cross species. Sometimes you can get, some bonds like that building. You have to be a wee bit careful that when you're putting prey animals with, the hunters, so to speak, you've got to be a wee bit careful that relationship works. Otherwise, you'll end up with proper raw feeding going on, and that's not where we want to be. That can be quite stressful for some individuals. But I think understanding, I'm getting there.
Points made. Okay.
Right. Okay. I think the next bit, which also overlaps very much with diet, is behavior. And I think this is crucial to me trying to get across a message about why it's so important we talk about behavior. Mental well-being, renowned, it's become real hot topic for human health. Actually, there's all sorts of stuff being talked about from, over 100 years ago, when they talked about the importance of gut health with regards to depression and mental disease. There was a great discussion amongst the medical profession back in 1911. They actually had a conference on this whole subject. And it was incredible to read that actually all of this stuff has been discussed that long ago, and almost when antibiotics came about, it got forgotten about for near enough half a century plus, and only there was sort of like the sidelines carried on talking about it, but the mainstream just seemed to think that actually obliteration of the microbiome was actually the way forward, and we needed sterile bodies to grow, and that was it. And actually what we've seen is the rise of mental health and depression and issues, and all of a sudden we've started to flip back to showing, there's a great display at the Eden Project down in Cornwall with regards to the microbiome. And that's, if you've never been and you want some information on microbiome, great thing to go and visit.
Awesome. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah. So, and I think from that, behavior is so important that we then start to look at how we enhance their ability to express natural behavior. And what does that mean to us as raw food feeders? Actually, if you've got a species appropriate diet, so something like raw meaty bones, that enhances that dog's ability to express natural behavior. So what could be more right than feeding raw meaty bones to your dog? It is something that is really, really important. And I think for the kibble feeders out there, they need to understand, well, how are they going to get to that same point of a dog being able to express natural behavior if you constantly are just putting these dried pellets into a bowl to feed your dog?
To give you credit here, Brendan, you blew me away a while ago when you were explaining this to me, and you said people are focused on raw meaty bones for all the minerals, etc., but it's not just for their dental health, it's for the mental health. And I think that's a really good soundbite to remember. Kudos to you, Dr. Clarke, that for dogs expressing natural behavior and their mental health, gnawing on a meaty bone is actually very calming and relaxing.
And kudos to Bella+Duke, because ultimately it's got to be, it's all very well saying it the first time, but unless it's repeated, a soundbite means nothing. So,
Well, we'll take that. Long memory.
So the next one, let's deal with these. We can rattle through them from the importance. Diet, okay? Look, the right food in the right amounts. It couldn't be said more plainly that actually, species appropriate feeding is there on the menu and it's here to stay, okay? It is the right food in the right amounts, okay? We don't want to be promoting obesity. We don't want to be feeding, excess amounts of certain materials just because they're cheap on the market, and we can bulk out foods with it to make it look like something. We want to be feeding something that the body's going to use. It's going to promote health. It's going to give them the nutrients that they require, not necessarily the same nutrients every single day, because actually the body needs the ability to have exposure to certain quantities at certain times. If you put them all together, some of those will compete with each other to actually be absorbed. So it almost makes a farce of this. Everything needs to be complete in every single bite. You need to ensure that they have exposure to the right amounts, but you need to be thinking about how they come across that. And naturally feeding, so feeding a diet that they would normally get through, is the most appropriate way of feeding our dogs.
Well, it's been perfected by evolution and it's backed by science. And I think that's going to be my soundbite.
Yes, and a great one, perfected by evolution. This is it. Kibble was not around in the Stone Age. It was not something that suddenly dogs thought, oh, you know what, that's what I'm going to eat because that's the way forward for my evolution. They have actually evolved over millennia into what they are today. 100 years, a couple of 100 years of us feeding something that we've cobbled together is not going to evolutionary change what they are at their core. Okay? Even with intense breeding, okay? I've seen so many papers written about the genetic code means that they can produce an enzyme to digest X. And you're thinking, yeah, but they can't access X because anatomically, they have no ability to break down the plant matter to actually get to a point where they could use that enzyme to digest that particular fiber.
Golly.
Look, we're all mammals. We've got so much similar genetics that, of course, you're going to be able to find a gene in me that probably would enable me to, have the ability to ferment grass. Is it going to be the ultimate diet for me? No, because I don't have 4 stomachs. It's like you
heard it here first, everyone.
You've got to understand, there's so much genetic material within our own systems, which is also the fact that we've evolved from, a common ancestry. But also, there is so much that's different about our microbiome that actually also becomes part of our genetic material. We had a great conversation off air about epigenetics and, the predispositions of, us to certain diseases. And yes, we might have genetics to mean that we can be okay with certain things, but actually when you start to feed that, you can still get disease because of switching off and on of genes. So really important that what we look at is that the diet is the right foods in the right amount. And for me, every day for my dogs, that would be raw.
Yep, 100%. I appreciate you are preaching to a very receptive choir here, but that is beautifully articulated, Brendan. Okay, so Brendan, just rounding up on that, you neatly surmised that you would always feed raw because it's the most appropriate diet. Before we jump into the final freedom of environment, I 100% agree with you. And I guess if we tie that back to the first one you mentioned, the first freedom, which is health and freedom from disease, we've seen so much research and so much clinical evidence and anecdotal reports on how raw feeding benefits your dog. It's kind of beggars belief that feeding raw isn't implicit in the 5 freedoms, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, and it's been something that has sort of hit me over the years, that why people are so objecting to naturally feeding. It's sort of like, we've had these welfare guidances for the last 2-3 decades easily, and they've been tweaked a little bit, and they're talking about a 6th, but ultimately they're there. We know that they're right. There's research behind making sure that they're there. Why is it that we just seem, because there's a commercial outlet that has an interest, that it gets swept under the carpet when it comes down to re-looking at the welfare of these pets? And actually, this is something, as a vet, we stand up and swear to uphold the welfare of our patients. And so it makes sense to me to be able to try and advise clients on the best way to feed their dogs.
Well, reassuringly, Brendan, we can see the UK market in particular is exploding with raw feeders, and the amount of inquiries for people wanting to adopt this freedom consistent natural behavior, natural feeding approach by using raw is really growing. And I find that super satisfying. And I guess that's one of the things we're doing right here today, is putting the facts out for people to empower them so they can make their own decisions, and just cutting through some of the myth and mayhem and madness which we often see reported, suggesting that your dog evolved from a wolf would actually benefit on a beef flavored biscuit.
Yes.
Or the equivalent of dog bags of chips. Nachos for your hound. Okay. Oh, don't laugh at me. You're only going to encourage me. Now, so what's the final freedom that we need to address today, Brendan?
Okay, the final one is environment. Making sure that your dogs have a suitable place to live. Well, I know that most of my clients will say, well, they definitely take advantage of the home. They're usually up on the bed, up on the sofa, chilling out, doing all of these. But it is important that we, ensure that whatever environment they're in is safe, okay, that they are free from being impacted from the weather, so that they're not just left out in exposed positions of snow, sleet, wind, rain, all of those sort of things. Or
burning sun.
Strong sunshine, burning sun. Okay, I know you love the south of Spain, and that's something that we often say that suitable place is where they have the ability to move into an element of shade or an element of shelter. Not that they have to, you can also give them the freedom to have access to the fresh air. Being stuck indoors constantly is not good for their mental well-being. So being able to move from one environment to another as they need to is really important within that. Okay, so when you're looking at how you create shelter, remember, look, there's some really important stuff on, I think Caroline is doing some stuff with Bella+Duke about how to make sure your dog doesn't overheat in the summertime. About looking at that. Remember, that thick fur coat doesn't just need to be shaved off. It's an insulator. It helps to insulate them in the wintertime and keep the warmth in. It helps to insulate them in the summertime and keep the sun out. So actually, just because it's hot doesn't mean that you should shave your dog off and to cool it down. By all means, give them a little paddling pool to get into and to chill out, or give them some other times. But so important for that, for the overheating, is don't put them in something that's going to heat their core temperature up. So if you're exercising in the summertime, it should be early mornings, okay? Sunrise man like yourself, okay? Out down the sea with Kismet, that's great, because that's early mornings, late evenings. Leave the middle of the day just to chill out and get into shelter if they want to, out of the heat of the sun, okay? And also another important tip: hot cars, okay? Hot cars is totally different, because that is focusing the heat. And rather than it just being radiant heat of the sun coming down, you're actually creating an air temperature, which is super hot and humid. And actually, dogs' primary heat control is by panting. So good hydration is required. Hot air over the tongue that actually evaporates the moisture off the tongue and cools the blood within the tongue. That is a way of them cooling down. If you take that ability away because they're becoming dehydrated, they're becoming dry mouth, they suddenly can't heat exchange over the tongue because the air temperature is so warm, you're going to get overheating. So no hot cars, Okay, don't even think by opening the windows a crack that's going to be sufficient. Okay, dogs should not be in the car alone if it's a hot day.
That's such a good point, Brendan, and it's good to reiterate it, reaffirm that. For those of you who are interested, the Caroline that Brendan is referring to is Caroline Spencer, our natural canine behaviourist. And one of the other fantastic tips I picked up from Caroline is, on a hot day, if you're not sure if your dog should be walking outside on the pavement, put your hand on the pavement. If it feels hot to touch, then just remember that it's going to feel hot to your dog's paws as well. They don't walk around in espadrilles or Crocs or whichever. Those paws are directly in contact with that tarmac. So that's a key part to looking after your dog as well, is just being aware of the environment that they are in.
And if you really want to feel what that's like, you know, I remember when I was a young lad being taken to Spain for the first time when I was about 6, and having to walk from the hotel to the beach in bare feet, because that's what we used to do in those days. And actually you hit the beach in Spain at 11 o'clock in the morning, and you're there hopscotching from one foot to the other because it's that hot on the surface of the sand. And just imagining that that's what the dogs walking the pavements would be feeling, you know, at that point. Yeah, scorching.
Wow. Okay. Well, Dr. Brendan, I think that's a wrap. We've covered those quite handsomely. There's some really interesting insights into that. I think key takeaways are: spend more time with your dog, throw more love at your dog, and feed your dog raw.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rowan.
Thank you so much, Brendan. We always appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you in another episode soon.
The Pet Health and Happiness podcast from Bella+Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behaviour and health, with expert interviews, mythbusters and more to help your pet lead a healthier, happier life.